In example 5, we're going to graph, and this time we have an amplitude to deal with, we have a shift left, and we have a shift down that we're going to talk about how to do. So just like before in all of them, we're going to start with those 5 key points, and we always do the 5 key points with what's in the parentheses. So that first table that you're going to set up is always what's inside those parentheses, which is at x plus pi over 4. So let's put in our original points, which are 0, pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. And then again, we always go ahead and evaluate those functions. So what's the sine of 0? Sine of 0 is 0. The sine of pi over 2 is 1. Sine of pi is 0. Sine of 3 pi over 2 is negative 1. And the sine of 2 pi is 0. Then what we need to do is we need to find these x's. And to find those x's, we're taking whatever we have as our key points, and we're going to set them equal to, or we're going to take this x plus pi over 4 and set them equal to our 5 key points. So let's start with 0. So we get x plus pi over 4 equal to 0. So if we subtract pi over 4 from both sides, we get x is equal to negative pi over 4. So that goes in our first one. Then we're going to take that x plus pi over 4, and we're going to set it equal to pi over 2. Now, if we set it equal to pi over 2, we're subtracting pi over 4, so we get x is equal to pi over 2 minus pi over 4. And we have to get common denominators in order to subtract these. So the common denominator would be 4, which means we would change 2 pi over 2 to 2 pi over 4. And then we can subtract, and you'll see that you get x equal to pi over 4. So that goes in here, pi over 4. Then we'll take the x plus pi over 4, and we're going to set it equal to pi. Subtracting pi over 4, we get x equal to pi minus pi over 4. And remember, we need common denominators to subtract, so we can change pi is the same thing as 4 pi over 4, giving us x equal to 3 pi over 4. And we can put that in our next box. And then we take our x plus pi over 4, and we set it equal to 3 pi over 2. So we get x is equal to 3 pi over 2 minus pi over 4. We need those common denominators, so if we change that 3 pi over 2 to fourths, multiply the bottom by 2 makes it 4, multiply the top by 2 makes it 6. So we have 6 pi over 4 minus pi over 4, which will give us x equal to 5 pi over 4. Fill that in. And then finally, we're going to take that x plus pi over 4 and set it equal to 2 pi. And then if we subtract, we have x is equal to 2 pi minus pi over 4. Getting those common denominators, multiply the bottom by 4, multiply the top by 4, this would become 8 pi over 4. So 8 pi over 4 minus pi over 4 would give us x equal to 7 pi over 4. So our last one here is 7 pi over 4. Now, as you're going through the rest of it, we have to take care of the 4 that's being multiplied and the 3 that we are subtracting. Always, always do this last. So your vertical shift is always going to be left, because what you're doing is you're moving that line of reflection or that line, that midline, and then it's going to change what this number is going to get multiplied by. So to make things easier, always do the multiplication first and then move it last. So I am now going to multiply all of these by 4. So I'm taking this 4 times 0, which is 0, and then I'm taking 4 times 1, which is 4. Then I'm taking 4 times 0, which is 0, 4 times negative 1 is negative 4. 4 times 0, which is 0. And then finally, I'm subtracting 3, so I'm going to take all my y values now and subtract 3. So 0 minus 3 is going to give me negative 3. 4 minus 3 will give me 1. 0 minus 3 is negative 3. Negative 4 minus 3 is negative 7. And 0 minus 3 is negative 3. And remember, we're using these first x values, and here are our y values. And now we're going to go ahead and graph. So if we label our axes first, we have negative pi over 4. We have 0. We have pi over 4. Now remember, we're going up by pi over 4. So we can't just go straight to 3 pi over 4 because then the scale's not even. So from 0 to 1 pi over 4, we also have to indicate that there is a 2 pi over 4. Then we can get to 3 pi over 4. Here's 4 pi over 4. Here's 5 pi over 4. Here's 6 pi over 4. And here's 7 pi over 4. So you have to make sure your scale counts up by the same unit every time. So if you have to add in some extra points or some extra tick marks, you need to do that. Then with our y-axis, notice that we are going between negative 7 and positive 1. So here's 1, and then let's make that a little bit closer because we want our scale to be consistent. So here's negative 1, negative 2, negative 3, negative 4, negative 5, negative 6, negative 7. And then here's 1. So we have our point negative pi over 4, negative 3, which is right here. Pi over 4, 1. 3 pi over 4, negative 3. 5 pi over 4, negative 7. And 7 pi over 4, negative 3. And then we can draw in our sign graph. Now I want you to take a look at this. Notice, remember, normally we go back to 0 every time. But our midline has been shifted down 3, so now notice that we go to negative 3 every time. So we go up, back to our midline, down, back to our midline again. So you can kind of see that pattern as you go through it. If you have questions on graphing, let me know.